test to see if the whatever microphone's working. So I'll have to wait for the other video to start talking, and then I'll know that it's playing. Then I'll know the microphone works.
It's working.
Yes, okay. So, all right. So it's an official room for now. Anyway, okay. So, yeah, I just thought I would do a room. Yeah, I just didn't feel like doing another video. Just thought I would talk about some of the issues around this whole idea of having a contesting theory, and you know, the process of finding some way to prove to validate one way or another, and there's a word people use for that. I can't think of it, but anyway, yeah, you know. So I guess one of the things I would say is, in the example of the two-slit experiment, we can get rid of Heisenberg, you know, the idea of this unknown condition of the photon and the unknowable condition of a photon, by merely aiming something, right? So if we can find something that will obey aiming, and so we know what slit it goes through because we aim it in one slit or the other slit, and we aim it at a precise locations inside the slit, so to speak, you know, to make sure we go at different locations in the slit. Then we can resolve this, because if we get the same pattern with aimed photons, then this whole Heisenberg crap disappears, because it obviously doesn't apply anymore. So it's not relevant or meaningful, because knowing where the photon is doesn't collapse its function at all. It does exactly the same thing, even though you know exactly where the photon goes because you aim it. So that would be one experiment to prove me right and quantum mechanics wrong. So we need something to aim at a two-slit experiment, or single slit. It doesn't really matter, because it's the same experiment, really. The single slit is the, you know, two-surface experiment. And Newton did the single surface experiment, but obviously a single surface in a circle, you know, Newton's rings, circles kind of break the, you know, they sort of break the rule, because that's obviously creating, you know, 180-degree opposing circumstances, which are the two surfaces. Even though it's one surface, it will behave like two, because it's a circle. So yeah, so that's one, you know, big. This would be a big deal. Is this whole, if we can just find something? They claim they can do all these things with photons. They can, you know, they can make brothers and sisters out of them. They can do all this stuff, they claim. And so if they claim all this ability, they should have the ability to aim them. So the whole thing does sound a little bit silly, that they can know all this stuff and do all this stuff with photons to do all these strangled experiments, and yet they can't aim one at two slits, you know, that are 500 nanometers wide, which is fairly wide. You know, realistically. Anyway, so, and then the other things are like the lensing argument. You know, again, this one isn't me who needs to have the evidence. It's them that doesn't have the evidence. So they have the original experiment by the Edinburgh guy. Not great science, never repeated. So we can just say that never successfully repeated. I mean, they claim that to be an important thing. And then they have the Hubble telescope making no contribution when it comes to solar lensing, you know, our sun lensing. And that's what Einstein predicted. So that prediction by Einstein seems quite suspect. And why do I have a burden of proving Einstein wrong when Einstein hasn't been proven right? So that's a big problem. All right, then you got the Mercury thing. Now the Mercury thing is just kind of, it's a kind of a simple, I think, explanation for why, what Newton's mistake was, or the people of Newton's time's mistake was, is in not considering the fact that the center of, even though the sun doesn't physically move a substantial distance anywhere, the center of gravity of the sun does move because of Mercury's influence. And that's true of all orbiting systems. Now, in the case of the Earth and the sun, even the sun's gravity on the Earth is tiny. Where the Earth is located in its orbit, the gravitational pull of the sun is so weak, that it's 0.01 meter per second versus the surface of the Earth, where we're experiencing 9 meters per second. So it's much smaller, much weaker. The sun's gravity at the location of the Earth is so much weaker than the gravity we're experiencing on Earth, even though the sun's huge, but we're so far away. Now, obviously, the influence of the sun, the Earth, gravitationally on the sun is very, very small, many factors smaller than that, but it still exists, and that's the point. And so Newton's math was kind of one-way math because the relationships were also one-sided. But when you have two equally massive bodies and you're doing a gravity equation, you have to account for the fact that the mutual effects they have on each other's motion are constant and constantly being updated. And so your calculus has to be more precise to be able to account for these compound effects of push-pull, or however you want to describe that, where the two bodies are influencing each other proportional to the amount of gravity they're producing and the distance in the inverse square rule. So anyway, but the whole point is that this Mercury thing wasn't, the amount of offness is minor. And yes, Einstein provided a way of doing better calculus, essentially, to take into account the fact that the sun is basically orbiting its center of gravity, that it also is processing just like Mercury, and that the sun's precession is causing the irregularity based on Newton's calculations in the precession of Mercury, because the precession of Mercury in Newton's time was calculated based on a stationary sun, and that was a mistake. So that's not really significant, in my opinion. You don't need relativity, either theory, to fix Mercury's problem. It's not really a relativity thing. It's just an acknowledgement that you can't use the simple math of Newton if you want to get a really precise answer, because it doesn't separate the two forces, and it certainly doesn't separate them over the minutia of time. It doesn't account for the fact that it's an inductive force, essentially, gravity. All right, so that subject is probably best left unfiddled with. I don't really think it's relevant. But I guess some people are going to claim that it's proof of relativity when it's not really. It doesn't have anything to do with relativity. Yeah, but I guess I'll have to demonstrate that by going into the equations themselves, but I don't really want to do that. Not a win for me, I don't think. So the other two are the space-time thing. So space-time. All right, and whether the metaphor of a fabric of space, whether that's Einstein's or not. They keep claiming, people keep talking as if it's Einstein's vision of this fabric, which wouldn't be an accurate description of a three-dimensional convergence, so it doesn't really explain it. As I pointed out in the last video, they keep using clocks in their thought experiments that are light-based. And so they're using clocks that are based on the speed of light, the constant of the speed of light, which does screw up this a little bit. Whoa. So big storm, biggest storm happening, so maybe this whole thing is going to get blipped out. I wonder if it'll just end up leaving the room open or something. Probably disappear. Yeah, I don't really do the Spanish thing, so and such. I mean, asking what this is, it's called DraftScience. It's an argument in defense of a different vision of physics, as opposed to this quantum nonsense of vaporous photons. There's a whole wave theory of light is nonsense, that kind of thing. It's an argument against all that crap. People are just retarded. And I mean that, just this expectation that somebody is going to waste their time getting you up to speed, personally training you. You really think that's how the internet works? That people go online so they can personally train individuals and get them up to speed? No, it's coursework. If you don't want to do the coursework, then fuck off. If you don't want to watch other videos and pick it up on your own, then fuck off. You want to just show up and say, let me know what's going on. Fuck you. You're not that important. Jeez. Really? Yeah. So anyway, where was I? Yeah, so they use clocks that already have light built into them. So they use a clock that has a constant, and then they play this game with how the constant changes when you change velocity. But obviously, the whole theory of relativity goes out the door if you come up with a thought experiment like two things are moving, say, half the speed of light in the same direction, and then one of them stops. Now, you could say that it's getting, that the one that continues moving has a clock, the one that stops has a clock. Now, the one that stops moving, their clock is going to go faster because they're not moving. But they're not the ones that moved away. It's the guy who's still moving that moved away. So the guy who's still moving is the one who moved away, and is he legitimately going to look at the other guy and say the other guy's moving away from him at the speed of light, or half the speed of the light? No. He's certainly not going to be able to argue that the other guy's clock is going slower than his, because it's moving away from him. So the fact is, they do have absolute speeds. I mean, there's no way to get around it. And it's the absolute speed that's going to decide whether your clock goes faster or slower. That's a fact. So that, but obviously this is an experiment we can't do, so I can't prove it. But I'm just saying that, by my opinion, would be the result. Um, now, so velocity just degrades the performance of any clock. It degrades the performance of any piece of matter. The matter moves slower. Its metabolism slows down. So we're back to that metabolism art. So sometimes it's so it's really space-time versus atomic metabolism. Okay, so that's really the argument. Whether there's a space-time dimension, or whether there's just metabolism, that atoms and electrons and quarks and all that stuff have a metabolism, and the metabolism is slowed down when they have velocity. When they have velocity, they're distracted. Velocity causes a multitasking problem. We'll call it that. Velocity. Let's see, a multitasking problem. I don't know what that means later, but I think I will, but we'll see. All right, so these are, so the disproof of bent space. How do you disprove bent space? I suppose the easiest way, this is one of those things where this is a three-bear story. And all I have to do is point out that I can make up another story. Show it's a story by providing another story. S-T-O-R-Y, by providing another equally explanatory equally explanatory explanation. So if I come up with something that's not, let's say, not bent space, but some other way to tie time and distance together, obviously the two are obviously tied together, but that's all bent space really is a representation of that, and it just does the inverse square law. So there's a proportional relationship between velocity, proportional, let's say relationship between velocity or acceleration and it's not how you measure time, but instrumental measurement. Okay, and that's the real relationship. So you're just coming up with metaphors or analogies to that relationship. So if I come up with some other way to describe the inverse square law, essentially, I mean, you can bend space, you can cause something to bend, and that would do it. All I need to do is create this curve. I just need to create this idea of a curve. And there's got to be some other way to represent that. And then you'll have evidence that it's just a story, that you could come up with lots of ways to represent it. I suppose string theory is doing it, because they're just going to say the tension on the strings is the inverse square law, or but clearly that's not a You know, I mean, it is funny that these are all made up concepts. And all you have to do is you're just taking, I don't know what the right word is. You're using an analogy and to a non-existent yeah, I don't know what to say, condition or space or place or stuff. So it is kind of just a cartoon. So I guess the thing I would argue is that I'd rather just argue that the idea of atomic metabolism just makes more sense. And it explains the same thing. And then clearly the particle gravity does the inverse square law. So you don't have to go any further than that. So, and you can just replace bent space with velocity being a consequence of acquiring speed, acquiring fish in a direction, acquiring quanta moving in a direction, and your percentage of quanta changes, your speed changes. So as you add quanta that have a directional vector, you'll acquire the velocity of that vector. You'll acquire velocity in that direction. Yeah, so I'm still using analogies. But to me, it's an obviously more compelling analogy because it doesn't depend on nothing doing something. I'm giving you a something doing something. That's a big difference. Something doing something is a lot better than nothing doing something. Yeah. Fairly certain of that. So, no viewers. That doesn't seem right at all. Must be something going on here. That's weird. That's really weird. Maybe I'm not connected to the internet or something. I don't know. That's just weird. The room's marked private or something. How is that even possible? I mean, somehow Dario Diaz found it. Guess I can get rid of him now since he's not viewing. Yeah, remove is just the simplest of the choices. Yeah, that's weird. I don't know. Maybe that's just not accurate, I guess. 0 just doesn't seem possible. But anyway, I suppose it is, but it just doesn't seem like it should be possible. 0. No. But yeah, it is weird that if you do a search on in Mendham in quotes, yeah, nothing comes up now. There's absolutely no results, which is really funny. So YouTube is slighting me for some reason again. All right, so let's see if there's anything else I want to cover in this video. Well, I'm going to get to the stupid erasure experiment. It's just another bad, these are just such bad experiments. The 15 mirror, 15 filter experiment that's never been duplicated again. I mean, they keep saying that stuff. There's duplication, and it's like so few people ever duplicate these experiments. You're just like, oh, so somebody did it once in 1994, and they never redid the experiment? Nobody? That always seems a little strange. I mean, they didn't want to try to improve on it or do it better, or, that doesn't sound right at all. So I don't know what to think about that. Yeah, it just doesn't seem right. Nope. It's very strange. Still no comments, and except for the one guy, no viewers. Very strange. All right, so yeah, I don't want to beat this one to death. I guess I'll just go back to making videos. As nobody's going to make arguments defending anything, so or challenging anything I'm saying. So there's just no point. Pick a different night, I guess. Yeah, it's Thursday night, right? Yeah, Thursday night. It's not a bad night. Should be people about. But I guess I can try a Friday or Saturday, maybe. Saturday, maybe. See how it goes. And do a better job of it. So anyway, this whole idea of what I need to do to acquire proof or to demonstrate their error, I think I've done it with the two-slit experiment. I think on its face, you can just, like I said, if they had to defend something like the Huygens principle, I think a physicist would end up being, caught in a spiral of bullshit pretty quickly in terms of trying to defend it, because they don't have any evidence that it has anything to do with reality. And it clearly is just a contrived gimmick to make the single slit experiment into the double slit experiment. And that's all it's used for, that I know of, is whenever you need to turn a single aperture into a double aperture, you use Huygens. Otherwise, you don't use it. So it's clearly just contrived. The idea of an infinite source of something inside of something, you have a fixed distance of the slit, and the argument there's an infinite of something inside of there. I mean, a physicist should have a problem with that on its face. It should trouble a physicist to say, yes, let's have a principle that's based on a concept that there's an infinite amount of something inside of a non-infinite container. It's on its face not good. So, there's a lot of bullshit here. And the fact that nobody wants to talk about that bullshit or accept that the bullshit exists and that we're not hearing anything, nobody's defending the bullshit. So, I don't know. I mean, I can't rationally defend it. Because it is as I described it. It's a gimmick. It's nothing more. They avoided having to deal with the problematic results of the single slit experiment by converting it into the double slit experiment. That's all they did with a gimmick. I don't think they have any excuse for the lack of lensing. It's like there's places where, I could ask the question. All right, there's places where they think a black hole is because they think a blob of gas is getting bent by it because it changes its direction as it goes by the black hole. So there's places they know of where they've seen things like that happen. So they know heavy gravity is there. Whether it's a black hole or just a dark object, doesn't really matter. It's a dark area. They should be able to tell there should be a field behind it. So all they do is find one of these heavy things that isn't too many dozens of light years away. I mean, billions of light years. If it's just a billion light years, there still should be plenty of stuff behind it that they can lens. And why is there no lensing images from those dark objects? Those small dark objects. Why? And again, why are the galaxies, quote unquote, are clusters of galaxies, creating lensing when there would be very, very weak gravity created by a galactic cluster. The density of the matter in the cluster is so low, and the distance is so huge, there's no way you can do a calculation and come up with a gravity number that would be significant enough to bend light. And ergo, the invention of dark matter. But, you know, without dark matter, with dark matter, it doesn't really matter. They still aren't explaining why there's no lensing where there should be lensing. Places where they know there's gravity and they still can't see any lensing. It's the missing lensing that's more significant than the lensing they claim to have. Because the lensing they claim to have is dependent on dark matter, and the Einstein lensing doesn't exist at all, which is the solar lensing. And the implications of Einstein's math is that these heavy objects should be lensing a lot of objects all the time, regularly, and they're not. Okay. So yeah, so I've come up with experiments. So this whole idea of coming up with an experiment to demonstrate the existence of particle gravity, that's a tricky one. Because it's still gravity. I mean, it's, you know, it's the same force that's always existed. So if there was some easy test for it, you know, it'd be an easy test for it. How you make the distinction between testing for bent space or testing for a particle gravity, coming up with an experiment that can tell the difference between those two things is not too easy. I mean, a physical experiment that rules out one or the other. Pretty hard to do. So it says one viewer. So there really has been no viewers for this whole time? That is strange. But anyway, yeah, so I'm going to cut this short because we're not going too far, and I'm tired, I think. I lost the one viewer anyway, so that's probably best. Yeah. So anyway, so yeah, like I said, I don't know when the next live room will be, so they have to be a little more productive than this. But we'll see what happens in the future. And maybe I'll just do some more critiquing and such of other videos. And I do the writing thing, of course, and all this other crap that I don't want to do. Anyway, I mean, it's all helpful in one way or another. I mean, I got another little page of notes for the evening's work, and that should be helpful. So just piece at a time, blah, 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 blah. So anyway, until next time and such.